Dear Naina, on behalf of the Center for Strategic Philanthropy at the University of Cambridge, thank you so much for your time today to discuss the developing shifts in philanthropy in Asia and the wider global growth markets. Naina is a daughter of Calcutta in India and is chairperson and CEO of the very active Asia Venture Philanthropy Network. She's grown AVPN within 7 years, I believe, from a team of 4 to a 70-strong organization operating on the ground in 13 locations. And during the same period, she was able to expand the network 5-fold to over 600 members across 33 markets. Prior to joining AVPN, Naina was a member of the senior leadership team at the Monitor Group and co-founded Group 50 Private, which curates contemporary Indian art to spotlight many aspiring Indian artists. In 2019, Naina was recognized as one of Asia's top sustainability superwomen by CSR Works. Allow me to congratulate you, Naina, on AVPN's 10th anniversary, an exciting milestone for AVPN, which of course you've expanded very impressively over a short period of time from a purely venture philanthropy network to now an authority and a reference for philanthropists and impact investors and also CSR professionals. Can you start by telling us about the network, its philosophy, and also the efforts that it's most focused on today?
Sure, Badr. Thank you so much for having me here. And, it's a pleasure that AVPN is able to cooperate with the Center for Philanthropy at Cambridge University. So as you probably know, and as your viewers probably know, Asia has only 1/3 of the social investors in the US or Europe, and 6 times the population. So this means that if Asian leaders are to solve Asian problems in Asia, Asian capital has to spend every dollar well. Therefore, I believe that we must invest in the mechanisms that multiply impact, like intermediaries, like networks, and other ecosystem builders, and scale. So at AVPN, we see ourselves as an ecosystem builder for impact capital in Asia. As you have mentioned, it is our 10th anniversary. And in the last 10 years, we have nurtured the ecosystem and created opportunities for our members to first act through connecting them to unusual allies. By that, I mean, anyone from foundations being connected to business people, being connected to policymakers, being connected to social entrepreneurs, to learn practical insights from one another. So learn from practitioners and lead by taking decisive action to move capital towards impact. And I think many of our members are aligned in this desire to build the ecosystem. And that's why I think we've seen the kind of success that we have in moving capital towards impact at scale. You talked about our size. I think one of our biggest strengths is that we have enormous convening power in Asia, reflected in the fact that we run more than 50 events a year. And our last AVPN Global Conference in 2020 attracted almost 7,500 attendees, making it the biggest Asian social investment conference in the world. So we influence also a huge amount of capital. And I'll give you an example. During the last 18 months or 20 months now of the pandemic, our members have moved more than $10 billion towards COVID-19 relief efforts globally. Some of that has been with our direct support, most recently to impact organizations on the ground in India and in Southeast Asia. And I think the most important thing for me is that our members tell us that their work with AVPN enables them to benchmark, to set standards, and to apply best practices. They also tell us that their horizons expand with new perspectives, and they can see a roadmap to the future in their new work, in their own work, through stories that they exchange with their peers, with other people. And I think that's the thing that I am the most proud of.
That's incredible. And congratulations really on those incredible milestones. Asia represents thousands of years of traditional philanthropy, and the massive growth and wealth that is really bringing the continent, I think, to the forefront, where trillions of dollars is in line to be passed on from one generation to an even more socially conscious next gen. How would you describe the culture of giving and philanthropy back home in India, but also across the markets that you're engaged in? And how are attitudes to institutional and collaborative giving evolving over time?
So I think, you've said absolutely the right thing. Philanthropy in Asia has been around for centuries. And, we've always given, right? Whether we've given to the church, whether we've given to the temple, whether we've given to the mosque, whether we've given to our communities. What hasn't been around is institutional philanthropy. And that is something that is very new for us. There are a few institutions, you talked about, where I come from, India. There are a few institutions like the Tata Trust, for example, in India, that have been around for more than 100 years. And they have been doing institutional giving for more than 100 years. But they are a rarity. For most, philanthropy has been a private, individual kind of giving exercise that they do because, their conscience motivates them to do it, or they feel a need to give back to their communities. And for most parts, most high net worth Asians, and I think this is also true for the Middle East, don't like to talk about their giving. And that is where, it's been a problem as compared to the West. Because we don't talk about our giving, we are unable to inspire or, be role models for a new generation of givers. And that is where institutional philanthropy and organizations and networks, intermediaries need to come up, because unless we have a more formal structure for giving tends to be ad hoc. It tends to be kind of, linked more to emotional than to sort of logical, practical decision making. Sometimes what happens is, and I think this is true for a lot of new givers, right? Our first instinct is to give to education, because we feel, for a lot of us, especially who have come up, the hard way, or, we've seen our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation work really hard. We've made our fortunes through education, and Asians, as you are aware, put a lot of pride and a lot of worth on education. We think that's the best way to motivate and, bring up the next generation of individuals. But we don't sometimes realize that, it's not just giving to education. We need to give to education that provides, access to jobs, that provides training that will actually help people get employed. So instead of giving to scholarships, do we then move on and look at how do we promote more vocational training? How do we look at creating more job opportunities? And that only comes when there is an institutional setup, when there is an actual framework. And that's where I think, the Center for Philanthropy, AVPN, other kinds of networks are good to sort of share where there are unmet needs, where we can partner, where we can collaborate, and how can we actually bring our resources together to get a much better outcome.
And on the point about next generation, I'd just like to address the issue of technology. AVPN deal share platform makes more than 400 opportunities available for social impact investors and has successfully made hundreds of connections for that purpose. Can you share with us your view on how technology is perhaps changing technology, including through things like the use of artificial intelligence and embracing big data? How could philanthropists of all ages, not just the young, be using technology more effectively to boost impact?
So, Badr, technology is a tool that we have all learned, I think, how to use more effectively in the last few years. So, for example, data.org is a collaborative that was set up in 2019, led by the Rockefeller Foundation and the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth to build data science for social impact. This, we found, was particularly crucial during the pandemic, when our members were looking for reliable and accessible information on social issues and nonprofit engagement to make decisions on where to give. So using data to find the right kinds of organizations, to actually be able to connect capital to where it's needed the most, was really important. I think besides artificial intelligence, to me, one of the new interesting things that we are seeing in Asia is the use of cryptocurrency. So we are also finding that philanthropists are starting to consider how this can be used to support nonprofits. And I don't know whether you're seeing this in other parts of the world, but engagement by the crypto community in philanthropy and inclusion, we found, has taken three key forms. So for instance, giving tokens. So I believe Vitalik Buterin, a co-founder of Ethereum, he's demonstrated, the kind of scale that's possible. So donated 50 trillion tokens worth, I believe, $1.2 billion to India's crypto COVID relief fund just a couple of weeks ago. We've also seen the FTX charitable giving leaderboard, where the amounts listed by FTX wallet holders reflect their overall giving, including in US dollars, not just in cryptocurrency. We're also sort of seeing that, things like building financial inclusion in our work is also seeing that, in Asia, in countries like Papua New Guinea, for example, some of the more Pacific Rim countries where they find it difficult to access the international banking system, they are, looking at building in financial inclusion through technology. So, trying to either use crypto or use crypto tokens with financial inclusion benefits that are built in it, which I am seeing currently gaining a lot of traction. So I think it's a very interesting time. And I believe that philanthropists, especially next gen philanthropists, are really embracing this kind of technology to sort of look at more innovative ways of how they do their philanthropy.
No, I agree, and to your point or even question about whether I'm seeing that here, I absolutely am, including in parts of the Middle East and Africa. We're all still trying to wrap our heads around what the implications are for, as you say, using cryptocurrency, both in traditional sort of fundraising models, but also the back-end infrastructure that cryptocurrency uses, including blockchain technology, how we can better use that and build that into our philanthropic models and systems here. So certainly an exciting time, and it's moving very fast. I want to touch on, you mentioned a few times the word collaboration, and this is again something which we're perhaps, at least I'd like to think we're seeing more of happening. I've personally witnessed increasing appetites around collaboration with philanthropy since the COVID-19 pandemic hit, with some great examples of funders connecting and working together. Mm-hmm. In 2020, you partnered with many grant makers, investors, corporations, and governments to form communities around priority themes, such as technology to mitigate the effects of natural disasters and supporting women social entrepreneurs in emerging economies. How effective have you found this experience in multi-sector collaboration, and what would you like to see done differently in the months and years ahead?
So I think, we both agree, right, that it's not possible to solve the kinds of complex problems that we are trying to solve without multi-sectoral involvement. But I think we need to build alignment on what we are working towards. So if you look at, bringing people together around the Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Agreement on climate change, that is something that, we find a number of multi-stakeholders are aligned on, and they are ready, whether it be governments, private sector, other stakeholders, to come together to try new approaches and to sort of leverage each other's strengths to build innovative solutions. We've, as you mentioned, in 2020, we did a number of collaborations. One of them in Indonesia was called the Gotong Royong movement, and it involved a bunch of different organizations, including large private sector foundations like the Tanoto Foundation, the Indica Foundation, Jarum Foundation. It involved bringing together government, and it connected, as part of the collaborative, it connected donors and grantees to address social issues that were arising due to the pandemic, mainly focusing on health, safety, employability, livelihoods, and education. And in a matter of weeks, through that collaboration, We found that members had donated more than 3 million units of medical supplies. They had donated, training hours. They had donated capital to those who had found themselves unemployed. So we saw a lot of really rapid action by people coming together in a collaborative effort around a specific, disaster like the pandemic. We've also seen longer term collaboratives around specific themes in Asia. So, an example is the India Climate Collaborative, which is the first collaborative of its kind to address climate change in India. And they formed in 2019, supported by large international foundations. But then, for a first in India, managed to bring in Indian organizations like the Tata Trust, Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies, Mahindra, Swades. Because before this, we had found, especially for climate action, it was tough to get Asian funders to fund. And through this platform, by creating a collaborative, by creating collective action, I thought it was very interesting that they managed to inspire, motivate Indian philanthropists to come in and look at addressing climate change issues in India. So, I think collaborative or collaboration is often a very abused term. We all talk about collaboration. We all talk about people coming together. It's probably the hardest thing to do. And I think it needs to start with putting egos aside and saying we're all looking to work towards a common goal. And I think, if you can align those objectives and those goals before, then I think collaboration becomes slightly easier.
That's great advice. And that's, I think, good advice for any type of collaboration, whether it's in the philanthropic sector or any mission or objective in life. You recently launched, I think, Asia's first healthcare unrestricted pooled fund with a mission to respond to the COVID pandemic in Asia, addressing urgent needs from a healthcare and also humanitarian perspective. Do you think the pandemic is changing the way that people think about the role of private philanthropy and philanthropic organizations in helping communities respond to this kind of emergency? I give experience in the Middle East and North Africa where the government has been relied on and perhaps over-relied on for at least my living memory to provide immediate assistance and urgent assistance. And civil society more broadly, or the philanthropic sector, has been a periphery player at best. Do you see that changing where you sit?
I do, actually. And I think the pandemic has played a big role in it, partly because I don't think it's left anybody untouched. I think it's in our living memory, probably this is the first global crisis where we've all been affected. And I think by doing that, people have kind of gotten up and realized that, it's a crisis like this that can affect anybody, irrespective of whether you're a rich country or you're a poor country. I mean, I'm in Singapore, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we are really struggling right now with numbers increasing in spite of having, I think, an 88% vaccination ratio. And I think that has caused private sector philanthropists and philanthropic organizations across Asia to actually get up and say that, we need to step in, because I think a lot of governments, especially in this part of the world, have struggled. And it's not just governments in developing countries. Governments in developed countries have also struggled, as we can see across, whether it's been, around vaccination take-ups, whether it's been on the bet that they took about, which vaccination to procure or not to procure. Do you open up? Do you look at livelihoods, or do you look at life? And I think private sector philanthropy and business, for the first time, has actually felt that they can actually offer value and support to government and civil society in a time like this. So I think that's something that I have definitely seen. You talked about the pooled fund and unrestricted funding, and I want to spend a minute on this if you're okay with it. For me, that was really important and key. We all talk about building the organizations on the ground. We talk about helping them grow, but yet less than 5% of philanthropic giving is unrestricted or core grants. It's mostly still project grants. And I just think that as a network, we need to help encourage our members and philanthropists to be brave. Philanthropic capital is supposed to have a high appetite for risk. It is supposed to be catalytic. It is supposed to enable innovation. If we are so prescriptive, then how are we going to help innovation come up? And every philanthropist who does good because there is a nonprofit on the ground that is actually implementing his or her vision. And if we don't give them the resources to be brave and to take risks, I think we are being very sort of dishonest to why, or to the actual aims of philanthropic capital. And that is why we are now on our fourth pooled fund, and each and every one of them has been unrestricted giving. And again, Badr, what I find is when people come together in a pooled fund, in a collaborative, they are far more brave. They are much more open to taking risks on their own, in their own organizations. They will never do unrestricted funding. But when they come together in a pooled fund, they feel the confidence, or they are much more open to coming together and doing this kind of unrestricted giving. So I think, I believe that's the way to go, and that's where philanthropy needs to move to.
Very well said. And of course, risk and innovation are two sides of the same coin, and you can't have strategic philanthropy unless you're willing to take those risks and ultimately spur innovation within the sector. Exactly. A final question, if I may, just on the localization aspect. AVPN is present, of course, on the ground in 13 markets to cater for the local nuances and empower local champions. A report published by the Center for Strategic Philanthropy at Cambridge highlighted that local recipients of philanthropic investments were increasingly empowered to make their own decisions on use of funds based on their superior knowledge of local needs and imperatives. Are you also witnessing this trend? And what might this mean for the future of foreign direct philanthropic investment, both in these markets and, of course, increasingly from these markets?
So I think, yes, we are seeing these trends. And, if you really think about it, local organizations are best placed to understand their needs, to understand their cultural context, and therefore be able to design interventions that probably have the biggest impact. We are seeing that in Asia. We're seeing it, I'm sure, in other markets where you are active as well. What this really means, I think, for foreign direct investment in terms of philanthropy is what we've also realized is that for large international foundations, I think their goal is to use their capital to leverage or to, be the first sort of play to actually inspire local giving. And if we can use, that kind of investment to fund sectors that local philanthropists may initially be sort of reluctant to fund, whether that be, advocacy, whether that be gender justice, whether that be climate justice, which are all things we find in, at least in Asia, that local philanthropists initially are uncomfortable funding. But if that happens and, foreign direct funding comes in and actually starts that, we are finding more and more that local philanthropists are now coming in to step in, to take over from them. Where I think the movement needs to go and is going is then sharing those kinds of stories and what is their learning with others. And that's what will help when, an Indonesia shares what they have done with a Malaysia or with the Philippines, or even with a Kenya or, a Nigeria, for instance, because there is much more in common with an Indonesia and a Kenya than there is with, let's say a European country and Kenya. And that's where I think, what you have done with the Cambridge Center is really useful, because you've highlighted models and you've highlighted giving trends in these countries, which we need to build more kind of, collaborations. We need to build more bridges between them so that they can actually share, both philanthropists as well as organizations on the ground can really share their learnings and their experiences.
Thank you, Naina, for taking the time to speak with me today. And I look forward to the opportunity to learn more from you in the months and years ahead, and of course, to collaborating and finding ways to work together. Thank you again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.